Buenas tardes a todos los que nos acompañan acá y a los que están en el campus de Punta del Este. En el marco de la Semana Internacional tenemos el agrado de presentar a Scott Cunningham, profesor en Economía de la Universidad de Baylor, que nos va a presentar su trabajo Inferencia Causal y Trabajo Sexual. Por favor, recibámoslo con un fuerte aplauso. Y esperamos que nos puedan estar acompañando durante toda la semana porque van a haber otras actividades relacionadas junto a Scott. ¿Sí? Muchas gracias.
Thank you. To say that my Spanish is not very good would be incorrect. I don't know any Spanish. So I will do my best to talk slow and to try to explain anything that's not clear. I'll do my best. I have two research topics that I study. One is called causality or causal inference, and I'm going to spend half of the lecture talking about causal inference. And then the other half is called prostitution or sex work. I'll use the word sex work rather than prostitution, but that's the other part of the lecture, and I promise they fit together. All right? So let me go ahead and start. So I want you to imagine that there are aliens, extraterrestrials, floating in space, orbiting around the Earth, and they look down at Earth and they see these hospitals. And in the hospitals, they see these sick people. They're all very ill, and they think to themselves, those hospitals are hurting those people. And so they kill all the doctors, thinking that they're saving the people, right? Something is wrong with their reasoning, right? Something's wrong about their reasoning. They're correct that the people in the hospitals are sicker, but they're incorrect that the hospitals are hurting them, all right? Now for us, that's an obvious error because we know how hospitals work and we know why people are in the hospitals, but the aliens don't understand that, right? And in fact, there are many situations where it's not obvious to us the way that is, and we make the same mistakes. And I'm going to try to talk to you about why those mistakes happen and how we solve them in the social sciences. So there's two kinds of questions. The first is a causal question. What did the hospital do to the sick people? Did it help them or did it hurt them? And that's a causal question. If I put someone in a hospital, will they improve? That's a causal. You do A, B happens, okay? There is an entirely separate question that sounds similar, but that is completely different. And that is the health of the people in the population correlated with the hospitals? And correlation is a statistical concept. It is purely statistical. All that it means is that two things tend to happen together. That's all that it means, not causal. When I go, so it's not causal. So it's purely correlational, and it's specifically that term right there, none of which is causal, okay? All right, so causality and correlation have a very complicated relationship, and I want to give you another example. Sometimes you have correlations and they're not causal, like the aliens in the hospital, and sometimes you don't even have a correlation and there is causal relationships. And so here's my example. Let's say that you are let's say again the aliens in outer space are watching people on Earth, and they're watching this woman drive a sailboat across a lake. And it's very windy. They don't know that it's windy, but you and I know it's windy. And every time the wind blows, she turns the rudder, and every time it lets up, she turns the rudder back. Now, and so she is staying in a straight line. And the aliens from outer space, they see her turning the wheel, turning the rudder, but not moving, right? And so they conclude her sailboat is broken. And so they send her a new rudder for her sailboat. But they're wrong. The rudder is working. The rudder is actually causing her to go straight, even though you do not see a correlation. Okay? So this relationship between causality and correlation is actually, it might very well be that it's not the most helpful concept. Correlation may not be as helpful for understanding causality as we tend to think. And I'm going to try to explain why. Now, there is a theory of causality. There's several theories of causality. They go back to the 1700s. They go back to antiquity. But I'm going to rely on one because this one has become the main one that scientists in the 20th and 21st century use to think about causality. And it's called the potential outcomes framework. All right? So you have to imagine for a moment that there is observed reality and there is this unobserved reality, okay? So like for instance, I went and got my PhD from the University of Georgia and Baylor pays me a salary, okay? Those all happened. They're happening right now, right? But there is a thing called a counterfactual. And the counterfactual is this: Scott Cunningham didn't have to get his PhD, right? I didn't have to get my PhD. And if I hadn't got my PhD, I would have gotten some earnings, and I don't know what those earnings would have been. Maybe they would have been higher, maybe they would have been the same, maybe they would have been lower, okay? Here's the kick. Causality is a comparison between two states of the world. A world in which I got my PhD and a world in which I did not get my PhD. That is the definition of causality. All right? I want to go into something about this. We have to go through, unfortunately, there's no way to talk about theory without there being some models. There has to be a little bit of some math. There has to be a little bit of some math. So I'm just going to put up here 3 definitions. The first definition is this one, all right? The Y1 right here, the Y1. Think about that as my earnings in a world where I get my PhD. Your earnings in a world where you finish college, all right? Y0, okay? Y0 is my earnings had I not gotten my PhD. Your earnings had you not gotten your PhD. Now look closely at this. I have to be careful because my leg is broken. So see that little I right there? That means it's the same person. All right? That means it's the same person. So that's Scott Cunningham right there in a world where he goes to graduate school. Scott Cunningham in a world where he doesn't go to grad school. Technically, it's Scott Cunningham in 2019. Had he gone to grad school, Scott Cunningham in 2019 had he not gone to grad school. And we call that the treatment effect. All right? That's what we call it. We use this medical language, treatment, control. All right? That's the treatment effect. I want to know the effect of the PhD on my earnings. I got to know what I'm making now and what I would have made had I not made the same decision at this point in time. All right? Now, I want you to imagine this let's say we have everyone in this room, and everyone in this room finishes and completes their college degree and gets a job, okay? And all of you are gonna get a different wage, and I'm just gonna average over those wages. That's gonna be the average wages for everybody in this room in a world where you went to college, compared to Y0 for the same room. Y0 for the same room, which is your earnings had you not finished college, okay? Notice what I'm doing. I am not comparing you to some other students or some other individuals of the same age outside of this room. I am comparing you to yourself, all right? That is called the average treatment effect. It's the average causal effect of college education on your earnings. All right? Now here's the problem. If I have to know both what you made had you finished college here and what you made had you not finished college here, then I cannot know the effect of college on your earnings. I can't see you in two places, right? I can only see you now with a college degree with those wages, which means if I am defining causality like this, then I can't know causality. The fundamental problem of causal inference is that if I need both your observed and your counterfactual, then I can't know. I can't know, all right? Now, that does not end, that is just the beginning of the problem. We're scientists, and what we do is we solve problems, all right? So, I want you to imagine, let's go back to the hospital. There's somebody named Gary. He's in the hospital, and he has a health of 2, and 2 is a low score. It means he's not feeling well, all right? And then there's Scott, and I'm not in the hospital, and I've got a score of 4, which means I'm feeling pretty good, right? Here's what the aliens did. They did not compare Gary in the hospital to Gary outside of the hospital, because that's impossible. They compared Gary to me. But I am not Gary's counterfactual, right? I'm not Gary's counterfactual. I'm not sick. But see, they compared us, and when they compared us, they got a 2, that's Gary, minus a 4, that's me, a -2. And a -2 means, to these stupid aliens, it means the doctors are hurting people, right? The doctors are hurting people. And that's not true. But this is why the aliens were confused. All right, so we have to remember that we have to remember these definitions. Because if we forget these definitions, we won't be able to figure out the solution. The definition of what the hospital was doing to Gary's health is Gary's health in the hospital at 2019 at exactly whatever time it is right now, compared to Gary not in the hospital 2019 at exactly this point in time. That's the definition of causality. It does not matter if I can't measure it. That's the definition of it. All right? That's the definition. So, do hospitals make people sick? No, well, they might, but that's probably not what's going on. Probably what's going on is that sick people go to hospitals, right? That's the problem with correlation. Correlation does not tell you which of these is going on. Doesn't tell you. It could be the exact same number. When you take that correlation, it could be the exact same number. So this problem that some sick people are going into the hospital is called the selection problem. Certain people are going into the treatment for reasons that are directly related to the thing you're studying. That's the problem. That's the selection problem. So our job, whether it's in business, government, or science, is to solve the selection problem. That is your job. Whatever job you end up getting, you're going to have a task, and I'm telling you that task will come where a correlation has to be calculated and your boss actually wants a causal statement. He does not care about a correlation. Or he does care about a correlation and he's stupid. And you're going to have to educate him, okay? All right, so definition 4. If I took everybody in this room, all right, and I took your average earnings, right, I'd get some number. Got to be careful. That's this number right here. This would be 4 people that go to college. Y'all are all the I's. For people that go to college, what is your average earnings? And then I go get 100 people, early 20s that don't go to college, right? That they're like somewhere outside. I just go and find them, and I look at their average earnings, right? That's what the aliens were doing. They were just comparing 2 groups of people. Now, what I want to show you is that through some math, and if you really want to know the math, you got to read my book. I didn't put it up here. But through some math, I can tell you what's inside that number. I can tell you what's inside that number. All right, here's what's inside that number. One thing is in that number, and that's the thing that you care about. What is the effect of college on your earnings? It's in there, right? It's inside that number. You just don't know where it is, okay? Because you've got one number and you can't see the numbers inside it. But inside that number is the returns to college education. But there is another number that's in there, and it's this one. Now look at this one. Look at it really closely, all right? Y0, all right? Y0 for y'all, for you. Y'all is Mississippi language, so I'm a hillbilly. So D1, that's all of you, okay? College students. Y0. Y0, what is Y0? Does anybody have an idea about what Y0 is? Y0 is your earnings had you not gone to college. But you did go to college, right? So this is your counterfactual. It's your alternative timeline. It's your other universe where for whatever reason you never went to college, for all of you who do go to college. Compared to D0, Y0. These are the people outside. They don't go to college, and I observe their earnings when they didn't go to college. The selection bias in this number is the fact that maybe these 2 groups of people are different from one another when I compare them on equal terms. Maybe they are different from one another. And that fundamental difference between the 2 units is biasing those comparisons. It's messing it up. In fact, think about it. Think about this one. When it was 2 and 4, sometimes the selection problem can be so bad that the number switches sign. Completely switches sign. You calculate some correlation, you go to your boss and you go, well, I did this correlation and it looks like the hospitals are killing the people, right? Sometimes the selection bias, see, look at this. It's just adding it in. It could be negative. It could be a big negative number. And if this is a positive and this is a big negative, the whole thing becomes negative. And then you're really confused. So what we've got to do, and I won't go into this last one because that's going to take a little long, but it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to look at this one right here. What we've got to do is delete it. We have to trick the data in such a way that it deletes on its own, leaving us with the true effect. Okay? That's the goal of causal inference. Delete the selection bias. You delete the selection bias, you know whether or not hospitals are killing people. You know whether or not this degree increased your wages or didn't. You've got to delete the selection bias. All right. Okay, so the goal of causal inference, here's our goal. Our goal of causal inference, estimate those causal effects. I want to know the effect of the minimum wage on employment. I want to know the effect of the legalization of marijuana on some health outcome. I want to know the effect of legalizing prostitution on some health outcome. We'll talk about that one now. Those are all causal questions. But I am going to have to delete the selection bias or I will not know the answer to the question. Okay? So what you can do, and this is what we learned, it's really kind of interesting. For most of human history, we didn't know about the randomized experiment. We knew about experiments in that we would take a treatment group and a control group and compare them. They were doing that back with Aristotle. They didn't know the importance of randomizing until 1935. And in 1935, human beings invented the randomized experiment. And here's what's cool. Here's what's cool about the randomized experiment. It deletes the selection bias. That's why we love it. That's why we go crazy over the randomized experiment. It leaves no selection bias. I come in here, I flip a coin to this gentleman, you're gonna go to college. I flip a coin to this gentleman, you're gonna go to college. You don't go to college, you don't go to college. You do that, then the group of people that go to college and the group of people that don't are basically the same on average, right? Because you were just flipping coins, right? So if you could do an experiment, a randomized experiment, you can delete selection bias. Problem is, here's the problem. For a lot of stuff that you care about in business and economics, it is illegal to run a randomized experiment. It will be impossible. You cannot go across South America and flip a coin and legalize marijuana. No president is going to allow that. You can't flip a coin to figure out what the minimum wage is going to be. No mayor is going to allow that. It's impossible. It might even be unethical, but regardless, it could be too expensive. So what do you do if you can't run the randomized experiment? You do the next best thing called the natural experiment. The natural experiment. And here's what's nice. Natural experiments are happening all the time. They are happening all the time because all that a natural experiment is just some quirk, some weird thing that happened. It's just some weird, strange thing that happened. And suddenly when that weird thing happened, a group of people got some consequential, some meaningful thing happened in their life. Okay? And it happened, when that thing happened, it didn't have anything to do with those Y zeros. It was basically random, or what we call quasi-random. All right? So natural experiments happen regardless of whether it's ethical, regardless of whether it's expensive, regardless of whether you think it's impossible. They happen all the time. And we can use them to estimate causal effects. But remember, we still are going to have a comparison group. You have got to compare. If you want to know the effect of legalizing marijuana on some particular outcome in Uruguay, you are going to have to compare Uruguay to somewhere else. You can't just look and see what happened afterwards. You've got to have a counterfactual. But you can't just use anybody, because we already showed that sometimes when you use bad counterfactuals, you have selection bias. All right? So your counterfactual has to be chosen to look just like you if it's going to delete the selection bias. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at one of my studies where Rhode Island, which is in the United States of America, it is a state at the top of the country, Rhode Island accidentally legalized prostitution. All right? So this is a fun topic. You don't have to, now we can kind of leave the math, and you'll be pretty intrigued, I think, by this story. So basically what happened was, in 1980, the state of Rhode Island rewrote their prostitution statutes and forgot to put in there what prostitution was. They did not define it. They just said street prostitution was illegal, but they did not say non-street prostitution was illegal. In 1980, that was not a big deal because that's all there was in Rhode Island was street prostitution, but there are brothels and there are massage parlors, and with the internet in the United States, there was all kinds of non-street prostitution, which was technically legal. But here's the weird thing. Nobody knew in 1980 that they did that. They just accidentally did it. It was just dumb legislators. They just deleted a word. And when they deleted that word, they legalized sex work. But for 23 years, nobody knew, and police arrested indoor sex workers anyway. And they charged them with street prostitution. But then in 2003, a judge said, you cannot do that anymore because Rhode Island actually has no laws prohibiting indoor sex work. We have laws prohibiting street prostitution. We have laws prohibiting pimping. But technically, if these are massage parlors and it's indoors, I can't find a law anywhere in our statutes that prohibits it, which made the police very angry. Because at that point, here's what the police said. This is the chief of police, Tom Verdi, and he says, this was in 2005, he says, until 2 years ago, Providence, which is the capital of Rhode Island, Providence police were arresting alleged prostitutes inside the massage parlors. But then they had to stop doing it after a defense attorney, a lawyer, convinced a judge to dismiss the cases because of the wording of the current law, at which point the police could not arrest them. Couldn't arrest them. And for 6 years, from 03 to 09, here's what's crazy. Rhode Island tried every year to recriminalize, and they couldn't do it. They just could not get the support to do it. So Rhode Island, for 6 years, was the only state in all of America that had legalized indoor prostitution. Even Nevada, Las Vegas, does not have legalized indoor prostitution. It's only in these little tiny counties. So it was a real state. It was crazy. It was a big secret. They didn't want to even talk about it. I only learned about it in 09 because a newspaper article came out and said they were trying to recriminalize. And I was like, recriminalize? I didn't even know it was decriminalized. I've been studying prostitution for 2 years. How did I not know this? Nobody knew it. It was their big, embarrassing secret. So I have a natural experiment. For 6 years, I have legalized indoor prostitution, and I can be the first researcher to answer what is the causal effect of decriminalizing indoor prostitution on violence and public health. Things that before this, people were just arguing about in their philosophy classes. They didn't know. Nobody knew. How could you know? It had never happened, right? When it had happened, there was all this selection bias. Here, there is no selection bias, so long as I can find a convincing counterfactual to Rhode Island. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find 2 sets of counterfactuals. The first one is I'm going to use a weighted average of all states in the United States. Okay, I'm just going to use all of America as the counterfactual. That's called the differences in differences design. It's very popular research design. It's worth learning. But I'm also going to use this other one called synthetic control. And what synthetic control does is it picks a group of states that looked like Rhode Island before '03, right? Doesn't use all of them, finds a group that when you average them together, reproduces exactly what Rhode Island was. And that will be our counterfactual, all right? All right, so the first thing I want to show you is in fact, arrests did fall. They couldn't arrest these women, right? So here we have the differences between Rhode Island and the rest of the United States. And you can see 2 years before legalization, there's basically no difference in Rhode Island prostitution arrests and the rest of America. A little bit different here, but once legalization happens, Rhode Island dramatically decreases their prostitution arrests. That's not surprising because Tom Verdi, he said that happened, right? He said, I could not arrest these women. So you shouldn't be too surprised that it shows up here. Now, the second thing that's happening is as those arrests start to fall, I've got this great data set. I got a data set where clients will write reviews of sex workers. There was over 1 million reviews, and I wrote a program that they call it scraping it. Just pulled it off the internet and stuck it in a computer. And I analyzed it for Rhode Island. And what you can see here is that when they legalized, new women entered the market, and they were massage parlor. They were providing massages. That's the best measure I had. But they're providing the massages. Because remember, it's not pure legalization, it's indoor legalization. And this indoor legalization in Rhode Island brought in massage providers. It also lowered prices. It lowered prices 40%, which I won't do a supply and demand thing, but that's not surprising. It's big though, but it did lower these prices. It got less expensive to hire a sex worker relative to the counterfactual. That's the key. Relative to a weighted average of the rest of the country. Okay? Now, the second thing I did was I went to the Rhode Island Providence Library where they had this newspaper called the Providence Phoenix. In the United States, we've had a tradition of alternative newspapers. They're called alternative newspapers, where in the back of the alternative newspaper is a classified advertising section of prostitution. It's usually called escorting or dancing, but it's basically prostitution. It was kind of an open secret that that's what it was. I went through, this goes from 2000 to 2008 by the week. So this is a lot of data. And I counted up every single ad that was a prostitution ad, and I counted up how big the ads were, and I added them together, all right? Now, the black line is probably a unique massage parlor because it's an ad in the newspaper that week. And there's probably not going to be duplicate ads by the same firm, right? So what you can see is it stayed a little steady. I mean, there was this period of time where it went up. I spoke to the editor of the Providence Phoenix. He said there was a period of time where they were making a lot of money. And that was this time, leveled out. But then it exploded. There was a quadrupling of massage parlors in Providence, but specifically prostitution massage parlors, right? Prostitution massage parlors, because they're in the prostitution section. So this is not a massage therapist. This is a front for sex work, right? And they start taking out these really big ads. So look, this is what the Providence Phoenix advertisements looked like before decriminalization. You've got the Oriental Garden Spa, that was a big one. Midori, Spa Midori was a big one. And then you have after. They just basically, Midori, taking out full page ads, right? All of a sudden, it is profitable for them to advertise more openly. And they start advertising like crazy. And this was a very profitable period of time for the Providence Phoenix. All right, so why did I do that? I did that, I went through all that analysis. Because I don't want you to just believe me that prostitution was legalized. I want to show you that it did something, right? That's what I want. That's what you need to do. You have to show your employer that this intervention actually did something way before you start getting to the good stuff. Now, this is the good stuff. I want to know, here's what I cared about. The question if you look at the history of why people will criminalize prostitution, there are 3 reasons. It is immoral. That's the big one. That's probably the main one. Immoral or disgusting. But when they are forced to give a more legitimate reason, they'll say, well, look at all the violence against these sex workers. It's an incredibly violent market, so of course we have to prohibit it. And look at how much STD prevalence, sexually transmitted disease prevalence, there is amongst these sex workers. Of course we have to prohibit it, all right? But maybe it's the prohibition that's causing those things. Maybe if it was just simply a protected market, it would look different. Now, maybe horses can fly, okay? So it's not enough just to say maybe this, maybe that. You've got to find evidence for it, right? So I'm going to try to find evidence for it. And here's what I'm going to be doing. I want to know what is the causal effect of decriminalizing indoor sex work on violence against women and sexually transmitted diseases. What's nice about the United States is all of that data is collected by our government for every single state. The Department of Health collects STDs for every single state. The FBI collects data on rapes for every single state. Each state is not responsible. So this is the synthetic control graph, where the counterfactual for Rhode Island is a group of states that looked like Rhode Island before decriminalization, all right? So look at what you get. Prior to decriminalization, this dashed line is basically Rhode Island. Now, it's always hard to get a perfect fit, but this is what Rhode Island, imaginary Frankenstein Rhode Island looked like, and had they not decriminalized, it would have just continued to rise. But look at what happened. It plummeted. Rapes. Forcible female rape offenses reported. Forcible female rape offenses plummeted in Rhode Island compared to a carefully chosen counterfactual, carefully chosen so as to delete selection bias. Okay? Gonorrhea, this one looks a little better. Female gonorrhea, it's a bacterial sexually transmitted infection. You treat it with antibiotics, it's really not a big deal. It's not like it's AIDS or anything like that. But what's nice about gonorrhea, if there's anything that's nice about gonorrhea, one of the things that's nice about it is that symptoms show up really quickly and you go to the doctor. You go to the doctor because you're very uncomfortable, all right? So we have very good data on gonorrhea, and you can see here the counterfactual. Look how neat this is. Rhode Island had a weird pattern. Fell, rose back up. Counterfactual Rhode Island fell, rose back up. But counterfactual Rhode Island stays pretty high. Actual Rhode Island fell, right? So think about what this is saying. What this is saying is decriminalization, if I estimate the average treatment effect so as to delete the selection bias, this is saying that decriminalization caused, not correlated, caused female gonorrhea rates to fall relative to what they would have been. Relative to what they would have been. This is counterfactual Rhode Island. All right, so we tried to figure out why this is happening. Why would rapes be falling? And our first thought was, well, it's legal now, so they don't have to police these sex crimes, so maybe they just move these police officers over to policing rapes. So I called them. I said, did you do that? And they said, no, I didn't do that. We don't do that kind of thing. We just kept trying to go after these prostitutes. We just couldn't arrest them. So they did not reallocate any police resources. Second thing I thought was, well, maybe something weird happened with the data collection. Maybe there was a new definition of rape. Maybe Providence hired a new statistician. So I called the Federal Bureau of Investigation and I asked them, are these numbers correct? They said yes. I called the state police in Rhode Island. I said, are these numbers correct? They said yes. I called the Providence Police Department and I asked them, did you adopt any new software in 2003? They said no. Did you make a new hire in 2003? They said no. Did you just completely change the definition of a rape in 2003 and that's why it fell? And they said no, we didn't do any of that, right? Which left us with two explanations. Maybe the sex workers are not getting raped. I mean, you think about it. It's legal. They can call the police. Anybody that threatens them, they can credibly threaten to report them. They are working indoors. There are locks on the doors. There are security cameras. There's a guy working the front desk. The opportunity to hurt her is much lower than what it had been before. So it's possible that this law, by giving rights to the woman, has made her safer than it would have been. That's a possibility. I don't know that, so I'm just throwing that out there. The other possibility, though, and this is the most controversial one, and I am not claiming that it's true, I'm just saying it could be this too, is that maybe some of these extremely violent men went indoors. They just switched. Because we know the price fell 40%. We know that it's legal, so that price fell. So maybe there is some guy right there at the margin who is a rapist who stopped raping. Now, the gonorrhea story is a lot easier. Because of this influx of massage parlor prostitutes, it basically led to safer sex. These massage parlor prostitutes are not having unsafe sex. They're wearing condoms and they're not even having vaginal intercourse or anal intercourse, the two most dangerous forms of sexual behavior. They're not doing it. If you don't do those things, if you don't do this one, you're very low on the STI. You're probably not going to catch an STI. If you don't do this one, probably not going to catch an STI. The other things that you could do intimately with another person have very low STI transmission rates. So that's probably what's going on. Safer women, safer practices. Now, if it was just my study, you would go, look, Cunningham, I don't know you. I'm just coming to this talk. I think this is baloney, or that's a phrase in America. I think this is stupid. I don't believe you. But look, there have been other people in economics over the last 2 years that are finding the same thing. There was a study by Bishop in Amsterdam where 25 cities legalized zones for street prostitution, and in those zones, rapes fell 30 to 40%. That's how much me and Manisha Shah found. We found a 30% reduction also. They're finding the same thing, permanent reductions in sexual assaults as well as drug-related crimes. Riccardo Ciacci and Maria Sfiecci, they find that when these adult entertainment establishments, gentlemen's clubs, strip clubs, basically fronts for prostitution, when they opened in New York City, at the locations where they opened, rapes fell. Rapes fell. They believe, they find evidence that it's would-be violent men going to these establishments. All right? This is how science works. It's not just one study. Now, it's got to be a study that is causal. It's got to be a study that is obsessed with deleting selection bias. Has to be one of those studies. But then you've got to see several. You've got to see several of those studies, because maybe it's just a quirk in Rhode Island. Maybe it's just a quirk in Amsterdam. Maybe it's just something weird about New York City. If you're seeing it over and over and over again, it can't just be those cities. It can't just be those countries. There's got to be something going on. So, Manisha, my co-author on the Rhode Island study at the University of California, Los Angeles, she is a development economist. She was in the field in Indonesia, East Java, Indonesia, and while she was doing a randomized experiment, the mayor of East Java criminalized prostitution. Only for East Java, not for the neighboring districts. And what she found was, when that happened, sexually transmitted infections rose 58% amongst the female sex workers because they couldn't access condoms and because they weren't using the condoms. Not only that, this is the really sad story. As though that's not sad enough, here's the really sad story. Their earnings fell, and as a result of their earnings falling, they couldn't meet their children's school expenses and sent them to work. Right? You have to remember, prostitutes have limited opportunities, right? If they could work at Starbucks, they would be working at Starbucks, right? But the fact is, they can't make nearly what they make in sex work at Starbucks. So they have this ability to earn this income, they have limited opportunities, and they have needs. Children, family members that are sick, they have their own dreams, their own ambitions. They also have a lot of drug problems and alcohol problems, so it's very complicated. So concluding remarks. So here's my personal philosophy. What do we know? We know that sex workers are a vulnerable group of people that have very high homicide rates, very high sexual assault rates when they work outdoors, and when courts do not provide them the same rights as you and me. We know that's true, okay? It's possible. Not going to say it. Why am I saying it's possible? Because I remember the fundamental problem of causal inference. In order for me to know with certainty, I would need to know what rapes were in Rhode Island had they not decriminalized in 2003, and I would need to know what STIs were in Rhode Island had they not decriminalized in 2003, and I don't know that. All I've done is estimated a counterfactual. It's an estimated causal effect. But it's possible that decriminalization is reducing violence against women, and it's possible that it's reducing sexually transmitted infections, and here's the thing, that matters. That matters no matter what your opinion about sex work is. It matters. These people's lives matter. All right? So, where do we go from here? Well, one, we need more research on these topics that make you uncomfortable. We need more research on topics that you find repugnant. Someone's got to be doing it. If it's not you, I guarantee it will be somebody that is incompetent, that has an agenda. So someone needs to do it. They've got to do a good job. They've got to do the good causal analysis. You need a control group, and here's the good thing. There are methods available in 2019 to find those control groups in a way that deletes the selection bias. Study Uruguay. Study Germany. Study New Zealand. Is the United States experience, is it informative at all for these other countries? Or is something weird in Rhode Island? You know what? If you found something different in Uruguay, that would be important. It would help us know what's going on. We start to pin down the mechanisms if we can do that. Last is the big one, sex trafficking. We know absolutely nothing. We know absolutely nothing about the effect of decriminalization of sex work on sex trafficking. We think we do. We have many people that swear up and down they are not scientists. They are not social scientists. They have no causal background. They are usually journalists. They are usually activists. They usually work for NGOs who have every incentive to inflate this. This is an important question. We need to know the answer to this. Because if decriminalization is reducing violence against women and increasing sex trafficking, we've got some hard decisions to make. It's my Spanish. El fin. Okay.
¿Alguna pregunta, por favor?
So if I understood well, after 2009, sex work was criminalized again in Rhode Island, right? But have you seen after that date a change in trends?
Yes, so I didn't put that up there. When we published the paper, we only had data through 2012, and yes, rape started to rise and gonorrhea started to rise. So you did see some evidence for it when that did happen.
So if I recall, there is a decrease in the prices of the services in Rhode Island after 2003. And I was wondering if that has any significant impact on the household income of the sex workers.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I did not have, remember the data that I said I had? It was that Yelp-like data scraped, and these clients don't care at all about these women's household expenses, right? So I don't have a survey of actual expenditure, so I don't know. I don't know. But the thing you have to remember is, yes, their prices goes down, but some of those prices were covering risk, and the risks have fallen. So they actually don't need as much money to cover those risks because the risks are zero. Risk of arrest is zero, risk of violence is zero, risk of STI is small, so you don't have to be compensated for those risks as much anymore. So it's not clear that they're being harmed from the lower price.
Bueno, y con esa última pregunta queremos concluir la presentación. Agradecer de nuevo a Scott. Un aplauso, por favor, de nuevo.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a todos.